In the summer of 2016, Shin Godzilla got a limited theatrical run in the United States. Despite being a foreign language film in a niche genre which only ran for 2 weeks, it turned out to be one of the biggest cinematic events of the year.
And I missed it. I live in a state which was deemed unworthy by Funimation to have Godzilla show up in it, and for this I was quite royally peeved at the time.
What followed for me was a long, grueling year of waiting for a DVD release date, during which I did my best to avoid spoilers, skimmed reviews so as not to color my opinion in advance, and bided my time by covering news of other upcoming Godzilla movies. It was torture, agony of the worst sort. So many people were getting in on this grand event, and here I was wishing I could join them but knowing I had to wait in self-imposed exile.
During this year of exile, however, I had a lot of time to think about what little information I had allowed to trickle in, and slowly what had started as giddy anticipation adopted an air of concern. I began to wonder, what if Shin Godzilla turned out to be bad?
Part of what caused my concern were two unusual bits of information regarding Shin Godzilla. It was a wildly different reinterpretation, and it was a hard reboot of the franchise.
Now, a different interpretation isn't automatically a bad thing. In fact, the first time I ever spoke about Shin Godzilla was devoted entirely to dispelling the idea that definitive versions of popular characters exist in the first place. After all, different interpretations are how characters stay fresh, and if an alternate interpretation worked for GMK, it could work for Shin Godzilla. It was the choice to be a hard reboot that was a bit more concerning.
Every new continuity in the series had always kept the original 1954 film as canon in some form or other, so tossing it aside was a bit of a risky move and had the potential to completely change everything about the character. However, since we were going for something new anyway, I kept myself from getting too hung up on that detail.
The moment my concerns really began to take shape was when they changed the title.
You see, the movie's original international title was Godzilla Resurgence, which was a perfectly fine title. However, only a couple of weeks before the limited theatrical run, Toho told Funimation to change the title to a direct romanization of the Japanese title, from Shin Gojira to Shin Godzilla.
This change perplexed everyone. Toho offered no explanations. When asked, the Funimation reps were as flummoxed as the fans. Maybe even more so, since they now had to change all of their marketing material at practically the last minute.
A theory popped up that the title change was done to avoid association with Independence Day Resurgence, but this notion never sat well with me. After all, if that were the case, why not just say so?
I set about the task of trying to solve this riddle on my own, and the conclusions I reached left me worried that Shin Godzilla might be little more than a territorial ego trip on part of the filmmakers.
It all came down to how Shin was romanized, that is, spelled out with letters of the Roman alphabet equivalent to the Japanese kanji, rather than translated into English.
You see, there are various words in the Japanese language which can have multiple meanings depending on the context in which they are used.
Rei, for example, can mean cold or zero. Shin is another such word, which is exactly why it was chosen for the title. It can mean new, god, or true.
Okay, so I understand two of those translations. New Godzilla is pretty self-explanatory. God Godzilla is cumbersome, but still clearly what they were going for. But true Godzilla? In order for something to be true, it has to be compared against something which you would say is false. So true Godzilla compared to what? Oh, right. Him. Just like that, the pieces started falling into place.
That's right, as if echoing the events of the late 90s, Shin Godzilla was made because there was an American Godzilla on the playing field. But unlike the last one, people actually liked him. Even the majority of negative reviews had little hatred for how the eponymous monster was portrayed. This wasn't a creature you could say failed to meet the standard, rename, and portray as a weakling from that point forward. This Godzilla was good. This Godzilla could potentially define the character for an entire generation of moviegoers.
In other words, this Godzilla was a potential threat.
Suddenly, the decision to change the international title from Godzilla Resurgence to Shin Godzilla and not translate Shin had an explanation which made a lot of sense.
Like I said, Shin is one of those Japanese words that can mean very different things depending on the context. But there is no context for the title Shin Godzilla. If they had translated the whole thing to English, they would have had to settle on one of those meanings. But as long as it remains untranslated, all three meanings are equally valid.
Just like that, I imagined the people who made this film snickering every time one of us Americans calls the creature Shin Godzilla, because it was ultimately an elaborate inside joke. We English speakers have been calling this the true Godzilla all along without realizing it, unknowingly betraying our own Godzilla in the process.
So in a way, I was dreading Shin Godzilla. I started to worry that it was nothing more than a petty jab, a contest to see whose kaiju has the longer tail, if you will. And yet, in spite of that concern, I never lost my initial excitement.
For starters, it was a new Godzilla movie. I'm always open for stuff like that. The music for the trailers was nothing short of breathtaking. Seriously, Persecution of the Masses might be one of my favorite compositions of all time. And those trailer shots of Shin Godzilla himself really conveyed a sense of menace and power, even though it did seem kind of weird that he wasn't moving all that much.
In the end, my excitement and my concern balanced each other out, and as always, I chose to reserve judgment until I had seen the final movie. If it turned out to be bad, whether it was an ego trip or not, I would be able to say as much. But if it turned out to be great, I'd join in with the choir. After all, there's no reason I can't hope for the best while still preparing for the worst.